Hello and welcome to Time on Screen. This is a Worn and Wound podcast. I am Zach Kazan. I'm an editor at Worn and Wound, and I am pleased to be joined today by Kyle Snarr, head of partnerships at Worn and Wound. Kyle, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing really good. Thank you so much for having me back on the show.
Of course, you're like a recurring guest.
Glad to be here.
At this point, I think you've been on all of these so far.
Well, let's keep it going if you want, but I'm sure you're going to talk about some movies that I'm not too familiar with.
That's not the case today. We're talking about a movie that you and I are both very familiar with. We're talking Bullitt today, from 1968, directed by Peter Yates. This podcast is kind of timed to be in celebration of the release of the updated Benrus 3061, which we'll certainly get to later in the podcast. Before we start doing any of that, this is a watch podcast, so we should probably do some wrist checks. Kyle, what are you wearing?
Yeah, well, just like you said, kind of in celebration of this moment of this relaunch of this watch, I'm wearing one of my Benrus as well. I'm wearing, I'm going to just rattle off the number because I think some people care about that kind of stuff.
Rattle away, yeah.
It's the MIL. I'll just go with the MIL, W46374. It's the classic kind of Benrus plastic field watch from 1975. This was a gift to me from one of my friends who collects watches and had several of these. And when I came to Worn and Wound, he gave me this as a gift.
Very cool.
Which was really cool of him. Yeah, so that's what I'm wearing today.
So it's nearly period correct for the
yeah. Well, and it also is on, I should say, it's on a Forest Adapt single pass, which is one of the things you can get with this new Benrus if you purchase from the Wind Up Watch Shop.
Great. Very cool. I'm wearing a watch that is not related to Bullitt in any way. I'm wearing my IWC Pilot's Chronograph 41 in Seratanium today. It is kind of like a military-ish sort of like tactical, kind of watch. So it's similar to the Benrus ethos, I guess, in that sense. But I'm not going to pretend that this watch has anything to do with anything thematically that we're talking about today. So
that's a great one.
Bullitt.
That's a great watch, by the way.
Oh yeah, thanks. I love this watch. I've been wearing it. Still, it's a relatively new acquisition, and I'm still wearing it pretty much constantly. So. Cool. So Bullitt, Kyle, you suggested this movie as a conversation piece for this podcast. Obviously, late '60s Peter Yates directed film, stars Steve McQueen in a fairly iconic performance. Shot on location in San Francisco, a city that I think is pretty important to us at Worn and Wound. We have our wind-up fair there. We returned this year triumphantly after a few years being absent. Just a real quick and dirty plot summary. Steve McQueen plays Frank Bullitt, a San Francisco cop who is loved in the papers and charged with guarding a witness in a mob hearing by a powerful politician. The witness is murdered, and Bullitt sets out to find the mobsters that killed him and injured his partner. And it's kind of a labyrinthine plot, Kyle. I watched this movie twice in the last couple of days, and I don't know that I could really, rattle off like the specifics of like the mechanics of the plot. It's quite complicated. Do you have the same, kind of reaction to this?
I was hoping you could shed some light on it because I've watched it multiple times and I'm still like, okay, so they've cast a lot of guys that look really similar and I'm having a hard time keeping track of who's who in some cases. It's an interesting movie.
It's more about, it's built around a handful of really great set pieces and like a mood that kind of comes over you because of this McQueen character is just really, very evocative, and the performance is great, and like the plot isn't like the mechanics of the plot really aren't as important, I think, as just sort of like the experience of kind of letting the movie sort of wash over you for a couple hours.
Totally, especially when you were the age I was when my dad first showed me this film. So I spoke to my dad this morning, telling him that we were going to be recording, and I was asking him, "Hey, do you remember about what age I was when you showed this to me?" And he said, "I remember that you were young enough that when the character gets kind of blown away by the shotgun. Spoiler alert, by the way, right? One of the characters gets blown away by the shotgun. That I was like, kind of like, oh man, this might be too old for him. So I was pretty young, I would maybe in my tweens sort of age, and thought at that time, other than the iconic car chase, it was a pretty kind of boring movie. I've changed my tune on that.
Yeah, it's I mean, maybe we can kind of get into this in more detail, but I think that it, similar to a lot of movies from this era, kind of like these sorts of thrillers, in particular, it's really kind of a slow burn. Like
Yeah.
it's not it doesn't feel like a modern movie in the way that it unfolds. You just kind of see Bullitt sort of like going about his day. You get a lot of There's a lot conveyed about his character just through like very simple things he does by the way he, shops at a grocery store, for example,
Yeah.
or walks around a hospital. And
Gets out of
um
bed. Yeah.
yeah, it's there's a lot of kind of almost like a slice of life aspect to
Yep.
it. It's not built around like, one action sequence after another. It does have a couple of really great action set pieces. One that, we should point out right away is this very elaborate 10-minute car chase through San Francisco and actually into the outskirts of San Francisco, kind of like right smack dab in the middle of the movie. It's the thing that the movie is the most famous for, I think, along with Steve McQueen's, kind of like overall style in this movie, including the watch that he wears, which is, definitely a part of it. Another thing that I think is kind of notable about this movie is that it comes out in the late '60s. It takes place in San Francisco, but there's really like no presence of like the counterculture in this movie at
Yeah.
all, which I
Yeah.
just kind of found odd watching it, through my 2022 eyes, like thinking about like what San Francisco, must have been like in 1968. Uh, and I don't know. It's something I was thinking about, throughout the movie that's like not really a presence in the film. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, there was a couple of things that stood out to me. I mean, there's a pretty rich score to this movie, or at least
Yeah.
even some music that
Very
happens like
famous jazz score by
live.
Lalo Schifrin. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that at least when that's portrayed live a couple times, it puts you in a place, and you're meant to think, okay, you're in like a very cool spot, and whether or not that's counterculture or just like this was like the cool crowd, like that was really cool. And then there's this one funny moment where, the main kind of politician, and I can't remember his name right now, but
Chalmers.
yeah, Chalmers, exactly.
Yeah.
He says something like, "In your parlance, you've really screwed it up." And so there's these kind of things where, like, I think Bullitt is on the outside. He's not. He's not in like the main culture. He's seen as kind of this rogue cop. He's seen as a darling to the media, but he is like the guy they put on the most like crucial special cases, and they give him like basically carte blanche to like go and do his thing, and he represents something that is not the establishment.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. He had, there are so many, movies about like, hard boiled cops or whatever that are kind of like fighting against, the system or whatever. And like Bullitt is really like very much in charge, throughout, this whole movie. Like he's given a lot of authority. So in some ways, it's a very uncommon, movie about characters like this in that sense, I think.
Totally.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you saw this movie when you were really young, when you were perhaps too young to fully grasp it. I came to it a little bit later. I think the first time I saw it was when I was in college. Um, perhaps maybe a little bit earlier. What I remember about this movie is that it's a Warner Brothers film, I believe, and it was one of those like very early DVD releases.
Hmm.
And my family was an early adopter, the DVD format. We had one of the first players, and I remember
Mm.
this was one of those DVDs that was just kind of like everywhere. So I probably saw it, very early on in like the DVD days when there were like a dozen DVDs that were, out and available, to watch. So that's probably the first time I came across it. And I always, kind of like appreciated like that car chase at the center of the movie, for
Sure.
sure. And I kind of like Steve McQueen. Like I had seen some other Steve McQueen movies by that by that time probably, but um, it it as a younger person, it didn't leave like a super strong impression on me. I liked it a lot more, rewatching it recently for the purposes of this podcast, and I think I did when I was, when I was much younger.
Yeah, I along with this movie, I'm pretty sure my dad showed me The Magnificent Seven. He showed me Le Mans. He showed
Hmm.
me The Great Escape,
Yep.
and this was the one I liked because of only really the car chase, and so much so that when I later in college, when I was in film school at the time, long time ago, um, I did my senior paper on the art of the car chase and talked a lot about uh, different movies. This was the one I kind of centered it on. With one other film that we can talk about towards the end here. But and what really stood out to me about this movie and specifically the car chase is that that whole sequence can be removed from the film and just be a short film in and of itself. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. In fact, it's like
Hmm.
structured like a 3-act play, and it's super powerful. The I'll just say, like, the cars sound amazing.
Hmm.
The angles that they get really really these low wide angles that just almost have the full cars within frame, at going at high speeds numerous times.
You get those angles,
And
but you get every other angle too. Like they show you
right,
everything. Like you get long shots of the cars in the distance, you get shots from
yeah.
inside the car, you get those low angle shots. Like they really don't cheat you. Like you see, every possible view you'd want to see.
And in completely a sense of place. You are in San Francisco. There's no doubt about it. Every single shot has some iconic San Franciscan thing going on in the
Yep.
background. And it's an amazing sequence that it's such a standalone treasure. And, I think that's what kind of charmed me. I think I've watched that who knows how many times. I've counted, how many times hubcaps have flown off the Dodge Charger. And, there is something also really cool about it is that, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. It feels like they didn't want it to be, in a way. They wanted it to be kind of messy and kind of wild. There's a really famous moment where Steve McQueen's driving the fastback Mustang and misses the turn and then puts it in reverse and like peels out in
Yes.
reverse and then shoots up the street. That wasn't supposed to happen, but they kept that in the movie just to keep that rawness and that reality. And I think that is one of the themes of the entire film, is that at the time, at least my understanding and some of the stuff I've read and some kind of behind the scenes stuff I've watched, this was a very realistically styled movie. You talked a little bit about just how this one feels a little bit different than just your typical cop drama. And I think what they had done is they they put a lot of scenes throughout this movie in real places. That hospital was a real place that had real nurses and doctors walking around, where his girlfriend works in the architecture firm. That was an architecture firm in San Francisco, and
Hmm.
those extras weren't actors. They were the people that worked there. And I think he was really intent on going after a sense of realism that just wasn't present in movies at that time, and is kind of taking a page from kind of the French New Wave, kind of Andre Bazin sort of world of cinema verite. It's kind of woven in there. I don't know, I would say lightly, but probably more than other Hollywood films of the time. But you can feel it and you can see it.
Yeah. There's a naturalism to the way the movie is made and shot. It's filled with people who look like normal people because a lot of them are normal people. One of the things that really struck me in this most recent viewing of the movie is the hitman, like the guy, uh, is like the antagonist in this car
Yeah.
chase is like an old guy. He's got, he's bald, he's got white hair on the crown of his head. He's like, he doesn't look like an action star. And I just kept thinking, if they remade this movie today, that would be like a young person, like a good looking, like young
Yeah, he'd
person. It's
be a
just this kind of like
slick.
schlubby, like
He's like a grandpa.
mob
He's a
hitman.
hit. He's a hit grandpa.
yeah, he like literally could be a grandpa. So that just struck me as being just so like kind of strange and odd, but also made it feel pretty authentic. Um, so we're talking about like favorite scenes. It's got to be the car chase for you, right? That's a pretty
Yeah, I
big.
mean, I think if we want to talk about, so I'll just say one other thing about the car chase that I love is that it is virtually like it's silent. It's silent film. There's not no one's speaking during this thing, and how much
Yeah,
is
that's the other thing that would
conveyed.
be changed if they did it today. There would be like,
Totally.
someone, like on the radio, communicating with Bullitt, and or he'd have
Mhm.
like a sidekick or something. Like it would be just filled with quips and extra
Correct.
dialogue that's not necessary. So, yeah, no, the silent it does play out like a silent film. It's really really well
And so
done.
it's all about these expressions and how they're kind of signaling to each other with the way that they move their head, or and how they're signaling to us as audience members the changes in the moments of that scene, which again have that kind of three-act structure. So there's moments where when Steve McQueen manages, he's, originally he's the one being chased, and then he kind of doubles back and shows up in their rear view mirror, and just the driver shows barely any expression, but enough of a double take to go like, oh man. And I also love, just as that whole sequence is about to take off, I mean, Steve McQueen, his character Bullitt, sees that car and just this black Charger roll up, and he, his spidey senses are tingling, and he's like already knows. He's like, these guys are not where not where they're supposed to be, and I need to be
Right.
cautious of them. And I love moments like that. I also love once he does double back and he is in their rearview mirror, they're still driving slow. They're still just kind of just meandering through the streets. This chase has not started yet. And then they get to a stoplight, and the villain car, they put their seatbelts on. And then I just love the anticipation that's building. And there's all these little, very quiet things that say, get ready, hang on. All right, we're about to start. Okay, now we're going to go.
Yeah. The music is a big part of that. There's, like
Right.
the score kicks in at a certain point when
Yep.
like the
Yep.
chase
Exactly.
really starts. And yeah, no, like the building of tension is something that happens, throughout the film, like really until like the very final sequence, which is sort of the other like standout sequence of the movie. I don't know if you want to like before we get to that, and that's like really spoiler territory, so we should probably
Sure.
put out like the real warning here is that like
Yeah.
we're gonna spoil this movie that's 50 years old. So just like if you want to be surprised by Bullet, if you can be surprised by Bullet, maybe pause and come back later. I think the scenes in the hospital, stuck out to you. Certainly stuck out to me. Is there anything else you want to say about what happens, with Bullet in the hospital and all those scenes? Because they're really
Yeah.
important
So
to kind of establishing like the mood and the Bullet character, I think.
yeah, exactly. And so like, let's just say outside of the car chase, what are some of the standout scenes, right? And I think the hospital one is really interesting because again, like they were really intent on that being and feeling very authentic. I think it's I like there's like a little bit of like spy thriller vibes in there. Just I love it when people are kind of like sneaking into places by looking like a regular person, and
Hmm.
kind of charming the unsuspecting nurse to point him in the right direction, or doctor in that case. And yeah, so there's just a lot of intrigue going on there, which I really enjoy. Something I thought was funny and maybe kind of weird is like once Frank Bullitt's in pursuit of the hitman who tried to come back and slay the informant. He chases him, but he doesn't pull out his gun for like ever, like not
Mm.
until he's like, I don't know why, but I would have my gun like wandering down a dark hallway chasing some guy who has already shot a couple people. I think the gun's coming out quicker than it did with good old McQueen.
Yeah, no, you would think so. There are a couple moments in the movie where that kind of like test the limits of logic. We can maybe get to some of those
Sure.
like nitpicking things later. We already kind of touched on the way Yates uses like real doctors, nurses, just like very like authentic people in these hospital scenes. I think it's incredibly effective. I love the way um we spend a lot of time in the hospital because
Yeah,
a large component of this movie involves what happens after this initial hit, and kind of figuring out what happens next. All that happens in the hospital.
correct.
So we're there for quite a while, and what I love is you get this sense of the hospital kind of internal politics,
Hmm.
through the way Bullitt is interacting with people in the hospital, and the way Chalmers is interacting with these same people. Bullitt is very kind to people and and wins them over, and Chalmers is going over the head of the surgeon, for example, who has this kind of moment where he just has a Karen moment, kind of, where he
Yeah, for sure.
goes over the head of the surgeon to his supervisor, asking for a different person to kind of to take over the case. So you learn a lot about these characters through their interactions within kind of this very public place, which I thought was really well done.
It's good exposition, like when you can get all that character development and assumed backstory just out of how someone treats another person. That's such an effective way of getting into, without having to go into the details of this person's history. You can really immediately communicate to the audience, okay, this person is, a power grabbing punk, and this,
Hmm.
this other character is going to likely need this person's help in the future, which he totally did. And
Yep.
yeah,
And then there's a payoff there too. There's
correct.
there's a point where Bullet does need the help of that doctor, that
Yeah.
surgeon, and he gets it, and it's an important factor in kind of driving the plot from that point. Are there any other key scenes that really stood out to you, Kyle, in this movie?
I mean, just I think the overall kind of, you're in San Francisco in such interesting ways. The angles, the beauty of the city is really shown off here. I like,
Hmm.
you get a sense that of his character through the part of town he lives in, and which we can get into a little bit when we talk a little bit later about the campaign that we've put together around the
Hmm.
launch of this watch. But I paid extra close attention to those aspects this time around, as we were, concepting the campaign for the launch. And it's just a really great, like you said it early on, this is about a vibe. This is about um, an attitude that, and there's a reason why, Steve McQueen is known as the king of cool. He's just a cool character. And in this case, in a really cool town. And you feel it with every frame.
Do you think this is the movie that really kind of exemplifies that more than anything? I mean, just watching it back, it feels like his the iconography of Steve McQueen really kind of dates back to this specifically. I'm thinking of the clothes he's wearing, and just kind of his look in the movie, is it all really kind of comes together in Bullet.
Totally. I'm a guy who's often been quoted as saying effortful is the new effortless, because I take a lot of time to decide what I'm going to put on in the morning. I mean, Steve McQueen in this movie is completely effortlessly cool, right? Like you're saying, like the iconic things that he wears, and multiple cars he's either driving or riding in this, all exemplify something that has become, since this movie, like icons of what people consider cool. And
Yeah.
so there is a kind of a way to track back to this movie, and I think he's extremely cool in other films too, ones that predate this one. But there is kind of like an epicenter of what is cool kind of emanating from this particular film. I think a lot of the things that he does in this, it's interesting. He doesn't have like these big long soliloquies. There's no monologues. Most of his lines, because I recently reread the screenplay, are 3 words in a row.
Yeah.
Like there's a couple times he says more than a sentence or two. That there's something about that kind of person who's more of a listener than a speaker, where you have like such an interesting juxtaposition with Chalmers, who can't shut up, and then you've got Steve McQueen, who in some cases, you know, ends a conversation by hanging up the phone or walking
Yeah.
away without saying anything else. And so he's just got this demeanor of, and this feeling of like, I'm over you,
Yep.
not in like and not in a, I'm cooler than you way, but he's just like functioning on a different level.
Yep. No, you're 100% right. I love the way he just kind of like is constantly like just neutralizing Chalmers just by, with like these like non-responses or one word responses. He just
Mhm.
kind of like, you're right. He has this kind of air of being like above it all.
Yeah.
And he knows that, that he's kind of like, he's got a, he's got a leg up on him and like in so many ways.
Yeah. A master plan that even when, obstacles come, he's kind of ready for them.
Yep. Um, we haven't mentioned Jacqueline Bissette's name yet. She plays the love interest. She works at the architecture firm. What are your thoughts on her performance in this movie? She doesn't have a ton to do,
Right.
but when she's on screen, I think uh, they really kind of like make the most of her appearances there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's pretty magnetic, and I love that in her introductory scene, she they make her extremely capable. She kind of gives Bullitt a little bit of a task to do while he's like waiting to pick her up at the architecture firm, and you can tell real quick it's a very technical thing. She's proficient at her job, and he's not picking up what she's putting down. She kind of has to
Hmm.
kind of show him what's up, what's what, which is great. It puts her character again just into a really great position when it comes to they're kind of a little bit of equals on this film, which I think is really cool. And then she's stunning and magnetic on screen, which is great, and a great foil for him, even though she's not in it too much. But I think, and we can get into this a little bit later, but I think the most crucial moment of the movie comes down to an interaction between the two of them, and I think we can pinpoint the theme of the movie to that moment too.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I know the scene you're talking about. We'll hold that. We'll put a pin in that because I
Yeah.
know you'll want to come back to that when we talk about the campaign that we're launching with Benrus. Um, just a couple other kind of like loose strands that I think are um, worth mentioning. As you said, like this is a fantastic San Francisco movie. I haven't spent a ton of time in San Francisco, but
Mhm.
like it definitely gives like a very obvious San Francisco vibe, and I love how the like every shot looks kind of like familiar, even if you've only spent a couple of days like in San Francisco. You
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
you kind of like understand the sense of place immediately, and this is really part of like a trend I think in this time period. There were a lot of these like urban thrillers that were shot like on location in a particular city. We can talk about them. We'll give you guys some recommendations for like other movies to check out if you like Bullet or that are kind of along the same lines. Uh, you know, and this movie has like a fantastic sense of place. Not just like the scenic San Francisco views, but like the interior shots. You kind of like understand. You always understand kind of like where you are. In the city, and that the city is kind of informing a lot of the action that's happening.
I think it goes to the thing that you mentioned earlier about just some of the way that the lenses that they chose and the way that they frame shots. I mean, there's plenty of shots where you can see Alcatraz like in the back, or you can see a trolley cruising by. Like all those things are, very purposeful and, well thought out, but like also just like you don't realize like over time how important they are to making this such an iconic movie for that city, and how that city also has this movie on a pedestal for how it shows off the town. I wanted to circle back to the scene that you had mentioned also just at the airport, because that's a really crucial scene. I know that you liked that scene, but there's also this whole notion of Steve McQueen as a stuntman, and he does some of the stunts in this movie, and he does a lot of stunts in other movies. And he also has shared a lot of stunts with one of his very good friends who drove some of the car chase in this movie, and also was the same guy who jumped the motorcycle in Great Escape. But
Hmm.
Steve McQueen does do several important stunts in this movie, including the ones that were out on the tarmac of the iconic airport scene, kind of a predecessor of good old Tom Cruise, in that case. Like, what were your thoughts on that?
So I love the airport scene. So the movie kind of like climax, like the big finale. The second big set piece is this like very elaborate airport chase, and it happens mostly on foot between, Steve McQueen and his cops, and this like this mob figure that they've located, and they're kind of like they're hunting, and it's really a great example of again ratcheting up tension, because it takes them a while to find the guy, but there's something about like an airport as a setting in a movie that I think I always like that, because an airport is, I don't know, like airports are kind of horrible places. Like I don't like being in airports. Like they're stressful and like anxiety inducing. We kind of all have that experience in an airport. So like there's something like cathartic and exciting about seeing like like a chase scene in an airport. Like it's sort
Yeah.
of I don't know if like subconsciously we all want to like just like I don't know, like cause chaos in an
Jump
airport
out
because
of a
we're like it's
jump out of
thrust
a plane
upon
and
us or
run
something.
around.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
there's a yeah, so like there's a moment where this character that they're chasing, literally jumps out of a plane, and they're just chasing each other on the tarmac, and um it reminded me a lot in this viewing of Heat, the last, the
Yeah.
climactic scene of Heat, which also takes place at an airport. And it's just such a, inherently dramatic kind of kind of setting, with the planes and the sounds, and it's a public place, so there are, you have to like the crowd element
Innocence. Yeah.
is, yeah, and also just like this movie takes place in the late 60s, and so like it's also like a little snapshot into like what airports used to be. There's a lot
Hmm.
less security. Like this
Yeah.
guy that they're chasing, it was apparently able to just like bring a gun onto the plane like without any, it's just like not even a plot point. Like, he's like shooting at Steve McQueen at Bullitt at one point, and like, you realize, oh, like he had this gun on the plane. Like,
Yeah. You
were
got
they
to do
all,
what
was
you got to
everyone
do,
armed?
man.
Yeah. Um, yeah, no, I love the airport sequence. I think an airport is a great, a great, location for an action scene. And it's
Die
everything
Hard
is.
2 is your jam.
I love Die Hard 2. Yeah, no, Die Hard 2 is great. Um, yeah, no, airports are great settings. Like even a movie like The Terminal, like that Steven Spielberg movie,
Yeah.
like a very underrated Spielberg movie. Like it takes place, in in an airport. The
I
entire movie.
like
It's a great setting.
I like Catch Me If You Can. If you're talking Spielberg and airports, I think that's a great one too.
Yep, another good one. Yeah, for sure.
In that sequence when Steve McQueen is running between the planes trying to catch him, there's a moment where he like has to like lay down and cover his ears as one of these jumbo jets roars over him, and
Yep.
you can go onto YouTube and see some behind the scenes footage of him talking about that scene, and he was saying that the engines from that were completely lifting him off the ground. The reverberation, the airflow, and everything that was happening there were like tossing his body a little bit more than was apparent on the screen. So he's in there.
Yeah, no, and that's a tough environment to be in. I would
Yeah.
imagine. Like I don't know if I would want to. It's dangerous, like to
Yeah.
be around those jet engines. Like they'll you can things can go wrong really quick if you're if you're around those things. So
And then
I'm glad he made it through.
yeah, seriously. And then I just liked the cast, the other kind of characters also in this movie. I really kind of thought were pretty cool. His captain that kind of gives him kind of like a lot of leash to go and just like do his thing. I thought was a great character. And I don't know if you ever watched the TV show Mindhunter.
Sure.
But I don't know about you, but I was getting like some serious Agent Trench vibes from the captain. Like just like they must have patterned him after Captain Bennett
Yeah,
from
I think
Bullitt
that's a
because they were
good.
like the same guy. It was crazy.
I think that's a good point. While we're talking about characters being patterned on other characters in this case, I think it's worth pointing out that the Bullet character, while not inspired by Dave Toschi, fairly famous San Francisco police detective, Steve McQueen apparently kind of like has cited Dave Toschi as inspiration for his performance in
Mm,
this movie, and Dave Toschi most famously was involved in the Zodiac case and has been portrayed in other movies by Clint Eastwood in the Dirty Harry movies. It's very much based on Dave Toschi and um, and David Fincher's Zodiac film, another Mindhunter connection.
great
So
one. Yeah, absolutely.
um, so I think that's worth kind of pointing out if you've seen Zodiac or if you've seen Dirty Harry. This is another kind of interpretation of that Dave, the Dave Toschi character, and it's very, very different from Dirty Harry. Clint Eastwood plays that character as like a very intense, kind of like a scary like
Right.
cop,
Totally.
and Steve McQueen's interpretation is very much the opposite. I think he's like very measured and cool and in control. So I don't know. I think that's interesting, and for Tashi completists, if they're out there, this movie is certainly essential.
I love that. Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool.
So let's talk about the Benrus watch in this
Yeah.
movie. Like I said, this is a watch podcast, even though it might not sound like it, for the first half hour. So this doesn't like. I think that the watch has kind of become famous because Steve McQueen is famous and he's wearing a watch in this movie. But this is not like doesn't jump out to me as like a watch spotting movie. It really is an accessory that kind of um it just sort of like augments like the cool factor that McQueen is bringing to the part.
Totally.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy watch to spot in this movie. It is only in a couple of scenes. You see it pretty vividly when he's talking on the phone in the informant's apartment early on, and then you see it a couple times just quickly on wrist during the car chase. But
Hmm.
like it for the most part, because we pay attention to things like this, it's under his cuff, and the fact
Yeah.
and we know that it can slip under a cuff from that thing from that as well. But it was really actually a contributor to Worn and Wound back on August 15th, 2014. Brandon Cripps, who kind of boldly proclaimed that the watch on this movie is the Benrus, series 3061, and it's not been disputed since. And so that is a great kind of little feather in the cap of Worn and Wound, and exciting to see that kind of be unearthed on our site. But yeah, it's not a totally easy watch to spot. And there's also the other thing I should say is there's multiple pictures, kind of behind the scenes shots of him on set where it's extremely obvious and vivid and
Hmm.
seen on wrist. So
It feels like a very authentic watch casting choice. Like I imagine it probably wasn't even like a watch casting choice. I would imagine it was probably just Steve McQueen's watch that he just
yeah.
happened to be wearing, and just like putting on that turtleneck, and that sport coat, like everything else that he wears in this movie just feels natural and authentic and cool, and it all just sort of like it comes together in a really kind of satisfying way, I think.
Yeah, and I think it actually a lot of those elements came together kind of for the first time, even like having like that sport coat with the patches on the elbows, with that kind of turtleneck, with a pair of kind of like those desert boots and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Like this was kind of like a new look that kind of has to this day you would look completely relevant and not out of place. It's a very timeless vibe, and I love the watch casting. I think it is really interesting because you can, even though the Benrus 3061 is a civilian version of a field watch, you know how much I love a field watch.
Hmm.
Um, it it kind of can allude to a past where that maybe that watch was at one point, maybe he was in the military, maybe it was issued to him at one point. Like there's I think it connotes some sensibilities that someone with maybe a background in a career that needs a field watch why they would choose that to be their daily wearer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense for sure. Just in every possible context. Um, so let's talk about the campaign that launched this week
Yep.
to relaunch the series 3061. Kyle, this is sort of your brainchild, your area of expertise. You did a fantastic job with this campaign. It's beautiful. Why don't you tell us how you and the team approached it and what this is all about?
Absolutely. And the first thing I will say is absolutely a team effort. There's a lot of people that went into contributing to making this campaign, but I'm extremely thrilled about it. It was exciting, and I want to give a special thanks to Benrus for giving us much like Bullitt's captain gave him carte blanche. Benrus gave us carte blanche on how to come up with this campaign for them. So big thanks to them. So yeah, right when I started here at Warning Wound in a full-time capacity, literally the first meeting on the books was with Benrus, and they came to us. We did not know what it was about. They visited us in our offices in Brooklyn, and they said, we are relaunching the 3061, and we would like Worn and Wound to be the launch partner of this watch. And they traced back to the original article that kind of called out that watch in terms of putting it on the enthusiast scene, in terms of that being the watch in the film. And they thought that would be a great bookend to that story of having Worn and Wound be the launch partner for the revisited 3061. So we were really excited about that. And we concepted a couple of directions, one of them being, let's go to San Francisco. Let's have a model that kind of gives off maybe some like modern Steve McQueen vibes. And let's just go shoot this watch in multiple existing spots that are in the film. And so they loved the idea. They greenlit the idea, and we, a small team from Warner Wound, myself, Kat Shoulders, and Patrick from our video team, we went and found it. Kat did a great job of finding a very cool, very friendly, great looking model who came in and kind of approximated our Steve McQueen-like character. And we rolled into San Francisco a couple months ago, and just a couple funny little stories along the way. As we pulled up to the hotel, I'd given Kat several different hotels to potentially stay at that I've stayed at before in my career, and she didn't choose any of them. She just chose one that happened to have a good deal. And as we rolled up to this hotel, I looked at her and I said, "This hotel's in the movie." And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "No, this is the hotel that's featured prominently, like, in the movie. This is the Mark Hopkins. This is like the McQueen Hotel." And she had no idea. And we just had a great laugh about that. But really, during the production of the shoot, we really were in Steve McQueen's hood with this. Like, we were blocks away from where his apartment is. Right across from the apartment steps is the grocery store that he goes in to grab a pile of
TV dinners. Yeah,
exactly. You can't
so
live without
relatable,
them,
man. Like, it's like, yeah, really,
just a
really
pile of Swansons.
One with Steve McQueen right there. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and what's great is inside of that existing grocery store today, there are pictures that were taken on the day of the filming that are up on the wall that you can check out, and there's a very kind of fun, slightly cartoonish mural of the Bullitt, Mustang Fastback that's painted on the wall. So if you want a fun little tour of these a lot of these places, you can go there. So we spent a day shooting at various spots from the film, and one of the things that really stood out to me on the rewatch is the scene that happens between Bullitt and his girlfriend. And just to kind of give the context, his car is out of commission. He just had the big car chase, so he's riding shotgun in her amazing Porsche 365 Speedster. She's driving this stunner of a car herself, and he has to go. He gets word that there's been, another murder as part of this case. So he goes to try and get a squad car. They're out of him. So he has to bum a ride off his girlfriend to the hotel where this occurs. So they get there, and he instructs her, make sure you stay in the car, don't come in. And it's a grisly, murder scene when he walks in. And sure enough, what does she do? She follows him there and sees this sight, and kind of sees his kind of reaction to it is like another day on the job, right? They get back in their car and they're speeding along the highway, and then she pulls off to the side and runs out of the car. He chases her down, and it's like kind of like saying like, what's going on? And in essence, she kind of says, you're living a life that is so foreign to me. You're surrounded by death and destruction, and I'm really worried about what's going to happen to us over time. And I think, the only like really kind of one-liner in this whole film is what he says back to her at that moment. And he just says, again, in his 3-word cadence, time starts now. Mm-hmm. And while we were filming and shooting and filming these scenes and around San Francisco for this campaign, I rewatched that scene, and I was like, what a cool idea for a campaign. Time starts now. It's in a lot of ways where Benrus as a reborn brand is kind of restarting the clock on a lot of these models. And I think that line has become the tagline as well as the hashtag for our campaign. And in after looking at all the footage and looking at all the shots that were gathered, which looks so cool, and trying to figure out how to write about this watch, I was really inspired to kind of think of that watch, the new Benrus 3061, as kind of a sequel to the original. And so what we did for this campaign is we took that notion of time starts now, basically the theme of this movie, and created kind of a sequel of our own. So we've taken Time Starts Now and named the imaginary kind of fan fiction sequel to Bullitt. That's the title of this movie, and we've scripted a few scenes of dialogue and action that match up to our shots that you can now read on Worn and Wound as kind of a way to bring this watch into the context, to communicate that it is the sequel to the original. And it was an exciting campaign. The best part just being that Benrus was like, this is cool. Like, you should do this, and let us just kind of go wild with it and have a lot of fun. And I'm really proud of the results.
Yeah, it came out great. Like, really everything about it is just like incredibly well done. The photographs are beautiful, very evocative, and just Kat always does incredible work, and this is no exception. And I love the way that you've kind of like reimagined like scenes from this like imaginary sequel. It's so creative, and I think it really kind of like is in the spirit of the film, and also I think it hits the right notes for for Benrus as a brand. I think it's really well done, and I love that you use that scene from Bullitt, from the original film, as inspiration, because like that to me, like that's where like the whole movie's in that scene. Like the movie is about this character's like alienation from people around him, because of like the violence in his life, and he's this kind of like mopey, like sad, person, and through much of the movie, I think because of like his job, and like that scene is kind of where he's like being asked to turn it around, and where you like that, like the real conflict within him is identified. So I think that's like exactly the right scene to pick, to kind of like launch this to launch like this imagined sequel. It makes so much sense, and like the end product is just really really well executed.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, we were really stoked on how it came together. That means a lot to me coming from you too, because I respect the heck out of your opinion, Zach. The other thing I'll just say is we also had our video team there, and we filmed some behind the scenes footage for everyone, so that can be viewed as well on YouTube and on the site. So definitely check that out. And what's really cool is this was an exclusive launch with the Wind Up Watch Shop. And for the first, I think 50 customers, you can also get a free mill strap, adapt single pass in forest green, kind of alluding to the color of the classic Mustang Fastback. So you can check that out as well, which was kind of a fun thing for the Wind Up team, the Wind Up Shop team to agree to in green light.
Yeah, for sure. So before we shut this one down,
Yeah.
let's wrap up by um, I wanted to ask you if there are any other movies that are kind of like along the same lines as Bullitt, or kind of like make sense as like a double feature. Where should people go if you like Bullitt, or if you just kind of want to like watch a bunch of movies like Bullitt? What are some other films that sort of like come to mind in the same vein?
All right. So I have a strong opinion about this because I think a car chase, and a car chase is my favorite thing in movies,
Okay.
legit, my favorite thing. But I think a pure car chase needs to be between cars, not a car and something else. So I think a lot of people would say the French Connection, but guess what? The chase in that is between a car and a subway. It is not
Right.
a car chase, it's a car subway chase. So I'm not going with it. What I am going to go with is an amazing car chase, which I think I could put Bullitt, like give it a run for its money in terms of best ever. I think is Ronin. I love
Sure.
Ronin.
Yeah.
It's an amazing kind of realistic feeling spy thriller, and the car chases in it are gripping and important, and like they really have the similar kind of beats that you want out of a car chase. And I think there's at least 2.5 decent little segments in there that are just like, if you're into cars on film, this will check some boxes for you.
Yeah, Ronin is amazing. Highly recommend Ronin. Even if you're not into car chases, it's just a fantastic like spy thriller.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, love Ronin, and I agree that a car chase should have, it should be between cars. I love the French Connection. I think the French Connection is still kind of like worthy of being like in the same like kind of like a pool
Conversation.
as
Yeah,
Bullet. Yeah, like I put it in that urban thriller
for sure.
category. And that's kind of like what I thought of when I thought about this question, is like, what are some other movies that really showcase a city in
Mm,
a way that that Bullitt does? And there's another Peter Yates movie called the Friends of Eddie Coyle, which is shot in Boston and really does for Boston a lot of the same things that Bullitt does for San Francisco. So if you like Bullitt, highly recommend checking out the Friends of Eddie Coyle. Fantastic Peter Yates film. Another great urban thriller, one of my favorites. I just want to shout out. I rewatched it recently. Taking of Pelham 123.
all
Another
right.
subway, movie. I believe this was maybe like 4 or 5 years after Bullitt, but a great gritty New York City thriller, and like one of my favorites of this like period of this urban thriller genre, which is really one of my favorites. Between Bullitt, Eddie Coyle, French Connection, Pelham 123, like you've really got like a core of like like city bound, like very intense, like star driven, in a lot of cases, thrillers that I think you could really have a lot of fun with. And Ronin is just fantastic, like just
Absolutely.
amazingly executed. Actually, that's a John Frankenheimer film, I
Correct.
believe. So
Exactly.
fantastic filmmaker in his own right.
I'll say two last things. Number one, I live in Pelham, New York, and so that movie is definitely it's the end of that train line that
Yeah.
that is seen. So that's a favorite of our little town here, and I'll also say that just a fun little note that the stunt crew that did all of the Ronin car chases also do the amazing car chase with the Mini Cooper in
The
the Born
Italian Job.
Identity. The Born
Oh, okay.
Identity. Yeah, so it's the same crew in the Bourne Identity, which is another great kind of
Yeah.
like car chase that has some great build up and anticipation, and then really gets off to a good start. So that's one more little thing I'll say.
Mini Cooper car chase movies is like a whole other like
It's just a
category.
genre.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, thanks so much for coming on the podcast again. We'll have Kyle will be back on the podcast. We'll have other
Yeah,
guests too.
other people need to get in
will
here.
be coming in and out. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to leave us a review on iTunes. This is Time on Screen, a Warren and Round podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.